Should Boeing ground the 787 right now to check the gap sizes?
I would say they need to.
The entire fleet worldwide?
The entire fleet worldwide, as far as I'm concerned right now, needs an attention. And the attention is you need to check your gaps, make sure that you don't have potential for premature failure.
It began with a catastrophe that made international headlines. An Air India Boeing 787 crashed in Ahmedabad, with 270 dead recovered from the debris. But what investigators learned later was even more shocking, and it extended far beyond a single collision. Inside what was intended to be Boeing's crown jewel, the Dreamliner, they discovered defects so serious, so banned in aerospace engineering, that even top engineers were stunned. This isn't just another story about a software error or a defective rivet. This is a peek inside a culture where business was placed before safety, concerns were buried rather than corrected, and years-old shortcuts are now showing up as fractures in aircraft that still fly thousands of passengers every day. If you believe that flying on a Dreamliner means being on one of the world's safest and most modern planes, this video will change your mind. Because when an aircraft trusted by millions has concealed flaws that can lead to catastrophic disasters, it is not just a Boeing issue. It's a dilemma for every passenger who boards a plane and trusts that it will safely transport them home. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear could transform your perspective on air travel forever. Imagine you're in the middle of a flight, cruising quietly at 35,000 feet, when your aircraft abruptly loses electrical power. That's where the ram air turbine, or RAT, comes in. A last resort technology designed to activate in flight only in the event of total electrical failure, harnessing airflow to keep vital systems operational so pilots can land safely. However, in Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, something unusual occurred. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner's RAT deployed while the plane was parked on the ground, engines turned off, and no crisis was in sight. Engineers were taken aback, and further examination revealed a terrible truth. A software flaw in the aircraft's central power converter triggered the RAT, leading the aircraft to assume it had suffered a catastrophic power outage. Even worse, internal logs revealed that a similar error had occurred earlier in the testing process. Boeing had the data. They knew. However, instead of notifying airlines or delivering a fleet-wide software update, the business chose silence, fearing public outrage and stock declines over passenger safety. The true danger? If the RAT misfires in flight, it can override regular power routing, disable autopilot, impair navigation, and diminish pilot control at key periods. A flicker of defective code may drive an aircraft carrying over 200 people into emergency mode without warning, leaving pilots battling to restore control as precious seconds tick away. This was not an isolated crack. It was the first visible crack in a far deeper issue within Boeing's coveted Dreamliner. Behind the cockpit of every commercial airplane is a hidden but crucial guardian, the front pressure bulkhead. It is shaped like a sealed dome and keeps cabin air pressurized at high altitudes, allowing passengers to breathe safely as the plane flies over the sky. Without it, air would leave in seconds, transforming the cabin into a deadly trap with no time to respond. But during inspections of Boeing 787 Dreamliners in Texas, authorities discovered something alarming. The forward pressure bulkheads were not perfect. They uncovered scores of misaligned drill holes, incorrectly sized rivets, and corrosion compromising structural integrity. These were not trivial problems with the prototype. These flaws were discovered on planes that were already in service, transporting thousands of unknowing passengers around the globe. Worse, many of these defective planes originated from Boeing's South Carolina plant, which was already infamous for cutting shortcuts and speeding up production at the expense of quality. the FAA had to issue an emergency regulation requiring airlines to remove insulation and use specialist cameras to look for concealed fractures and corrosion in these essential structures. What's Boeing's public response? Downplay the risks, reassure the investors, and declare that no in-flight mishaps were caused by these defects. However, aviation experts in Europe and Asia disagreed, saying that even a hairline breach may result in a catastrophic loss of pressure at cruising altitude, rendering passengers unconscious in under 20 seconds. This wasn't a routine maintenance issue. It was a strong indication that latent flaws in the Dreamliner's underlying construction could one day lead to disaster. It began with a damp carpet in the cockpit following a long-haul Dreamliner flight to Tokyo. Initially, it appeared to be a small maintenance issue. However, when engineers removed the flooring, they discovered a nightmare. Water flowing right into the E&E bay, which controls navigation, flight systems, communications, and cabin pressure. How did the water get there? Faulty seals in restrooms and water tanks allow leaks to travel through insulation and onto sensitive electrical circuits. However, the underlying hazard was not just the water itself. The water contained metal shavings, assembly detritus, and microscopic conductive particles left behind from hasty manufacture. Moisture mixing with these impurities on live circuitry causes more than simply rust. It causes hidden corrosion, short circuits, and burning failures that can occur in mid-air without notice. Boeing engineers identified this design problem early in the Dreamliner's manufacturing cycle. But instead of a complete redesign, the corporation chose temporary fixes, patches, and additional inspections in the hopes of buying time while avoiding costly overhauls. But this was not an isolated instance. Airlines began reporting cockpit leaks, incorrect avionics readings, and moist insulation, prompting the FAA to demand more thorough inspections. Only then did Boeing begin modifying drainage systems to address leaks that had been known about for years. While passengers sipped coffee at cruising altitude, moisture was slowly infiltrating the plane's brain, conveying a concealed threat that may one day transform a regular flight into a horrific disaster. These water leaks were more than just technical problems. They demonstrated that Boeing's culture of shortcuts was hiding quiet dangers within its most recognized aircraft. In 2021, Boeing assured the world that the forward bulkhead issues in its Dreamliners had been rectified. But by March 25, the nightmare was back. The FAA issued a new wave of deep inspections, asking that airlines remove insulation and photograph every inch of the internal structure. The results were sobering. Fresh microfractures, rusted regions, and poorly sized rivets that had never been completely repaired, simply concealed. At the center of these reoccurring problems was a whistleblower, Sam Saliper, a former Boeing engineer. Saliper had warned for years about the shadow factory at Boeing's South Carolina plant, a separate workshop where fuselages that failed first tests were surreptitiously patched and retrofitted. Instead of repairing these portions to standard, workers occasionally forced parts into molds or utilized non-standard techniques that damaged the plane's load-bearing structures. Boeing's drive to meet deadlines and prevent delays resulted in these patched parts being authorized for flight, despite harboring latent faults that would only manifest as fatigue and corrosion years later, when it was too late to undo the damage. Every fracture and corrosion mark conveyed the same story: secret shortcuts exposed as structural flaws in the heavens. While Boeing maintained that their modifications were effective, the planes told a different story, that of temporary solutions over permanent problems. These weren't isolated oversights, but rather evidence of a system eager to conceal significant problems in the name of speed and profit. And with each takeoff, these patched Dreamliners posed an unsaid risk, a reminder that what happens in the shadows does not always stay secret. Boeing's Dreamliner is not manufactured in a single factory by a single team. It's a worldwide puzzle, with pieces delivered in from suppliers all across the world. This approach was intended to reduce money and speed up production. However, it caused cracks not just in the metal, but also in the quality control process. Investigators determined that MPS, an Italian supplier, produced defective metal parts for the Dreamliner's cabin floors, components designed to handle important structural loads during flight. Surprisingly, approximately 500 Dreamliners globally were flying with these faulty components. Inspectors missed them. Boeing missed them. In some cases, defects were discovered but disregarded because halting supplies was viewed as a greater danger to revenues than resolving a defect. These were hardly the only failures. In 2023, a Boeing 787 on a long-haul trip from Sydney to Santiago crashed more than 120 meters in less than 10 seconds, injuring several passengers. What's the cause? Turbulence and minor tilt caused a software fault that tricked the autopilot into thinking the aircraft was stalling. There was no warning, only a terrible drop. In another occasion, a pilot's seat became stuck during a United Airlines descent, prompting the co-pilot to take control seconds before landing. The cause? A worn locking mechanism that was not even on the inspection checklist. Each of these disasters may appear to be distinct, yet they all point to the same fundamental issue: a culture that delegated authority, cut shortcuts, and ignored warning flags. Instead of investing in quality and safety, shortcuts were taken, resulting in hidden risks strewn over the skies in airplanes trusted to safely transport families and business visitors home. This isn't just a narrative about rivets, leaks, and one crash. It is about trust. Every time you board a plane, you believe that the individuals who built it were more concerned with your well-being than their own. But what we discovered inside the Boeing 787 Dreamliner reveals a different reality. A system that prioritized speed over safety, secrecy over transparency, and profit before humanity. These concealed defects are not insignificant engineering issues. They have an impact on every passenger, family, and trip throughout the skies. If nothing changes, the next failure may not result in a safe landing. It might end tragically. That is why this story is important and deserves to be heard. If you feel that aviation safety should never be buried under corporate interests, then share this video, like it, and subscribe so that we may continue to bring stories like this to light. Because what happens above our heads should never go unnoticed.